Hello, friends. My name is Amy Sloan at humilityanddoxology.com, and I want to welcome you to this conversation in our homeschool video interview series. Today, I'm joined by Kathy Weitz. Kathy, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Amy. I'm glad to be here.
So, Kathy is a lifelong Virginian and a lifelong learner. For more than 25 years, she and her husband, Rick, educated their 6 children at home, while she pursued a classical education for herself as well. In addition to her own children, she's taught a number of other students, both online and in the classroom. Kathy holds an MA in Christian and Classical Studies from Knox Seminary, and she currently serves as the Dean of Academics at Loudon Classical School, a collegiate model Christian classical school where she teaches arts and letters, literature, and Latin. She also serves as an adjunct professor of rhetoric at Patrick Henry College. Kathy blogs at The Reading Mother, and her language arts curriculum can be found at Cottage Press Publishing. So you're just a little busy. There's just a few things there.
That's a couple things.
Yeah. Well, first, could you just tell us a little bit about your family and how you came to begin homeschooling, and what were some of the early books and resources that influenced you?
Well, I have 6 children, ranging in age right now from 32, I think, down to 20. And we homeschooled pretty much all the way through. Everyone, my oldest 2 did go to a private kindergarten, which was a great experience. But it was interesting how we came to homeschooling. My husband and I both heard, radio programs from Focus on the Family years and years before we had kids about homeschooling. And we thought, oh, that's definitely what we're going to do. No problem. That's what we're going to do. Well, then I had twins, and they got to be the age where they needed to learn to go potty and tie their shoes, and I couldn't teach them to do either one. And I said, homeschooling, no, not happening. I can't do this. There's no way I can teach them to read. So, famous last words.
Right.
So they had a very good experience at our small Christian preschool. We loved it, but the options for school at that point, public school, we had decided was not an option for us. And so we just didn't really, it was just cost prohibitive, along with time. The amount of homework that these private schools were asking for exceeded the amount of time I thought it would take me to homeschool them every day. And that actually proved to be true. So that was basically our inglorious beginning. Finally, it was actually a friend of mine finally saying to me, I want you to stop talking about this and just do it. Stop agonizing over the decision, just do it. And I went, okay. And so we did. So that was our beginning. Yeah, and it was also another friend who dragged me to a homeschool convention, kind of unwillingly, where I came upon a copy of For the Children's Sake by Susan Schaeffer Macaulay, and that actually sealed it, because I read it and I thought, this is exactly what I want, and this is what I can do. And I had, all my growing up years, read 2 really important things, Narnia and Anne of Green Gables. And when I read Susan Schaeffer Macaulay, I thought somehow Charlotte Mason's principles were communicated to Ellen Montgomery. They must have talked at some point, at least via books. So anyway, so that was how we got started. And those were my biggest influences going in. It was definitely a Charlotte Mason, which I would also argue is classical, kind of approach from the very beginning.
And right now I'm reading Anne of Green Gables out loud to my 9-year-old. And it had been a little while since my last reread. And reading it from the perspective as a homeschool mom, I am having a lot of those same things. I'm like, did she read Charlotte Mason? A lot of those ideals, especially with Miss Stacy, just resonate with me. So. Okay, so
Yes.
As you began in those early homeschool years, what were some of the practices and habits that were at the core of your homeschool?
Definitely from the very beginning, reading aloud. I didn't call it morning time at the time. I called it reading time. But we would spend hours and hours and hours. Now, it was about 5 years before we had another child, not by choice. That was just the way the Lord planned our family. And so I only had really tiny little ones along with these two older students. And I really did have, they napped, and I had plenty of time to do that. So we did a lot of it. We just sat on the couch and read a lot. And I think I've said this somewhere, but every once in a while I'd feel like I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. And so we'd get some, program with lots of busy work, and I'd do it for a while. And then we'd all collapse on the sofa again to read, because that's just what we did. So that was really, from the very beginning, that's the one thing I would say has always been a constant, is our reading aloud. And I'm so grateful for that.
Oh yeah, you can't go wrong with that. What were some of your favorite books in those early years?
Well, of course, Narnia. We read The Hobbit. We read, every one of the ones you would think. We read Green Gables, of course. We read a lot of those living history books. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but things like the one about Archimedes and the one about Galen.
Yes.
And then some of the historical fiction. We read a lot of that kind of stuff. We read a lot of biographies. We read a lot of missionary biographies too. We read the Bible a ton. I learned more about the Bible when I started homeschooling than I think I had learned in my entire Christian life up to that point, which I only became a Christian in my adult years, but still. We read, I don't know, poetry, tons and tons of poetry. Whatever we could find to read. Anything that my kids needed to read, I felt we read aloud. I never made them go read that all by themselves. They would go off and read landmark books by themselves.
Okay.
But because we had them in the house, because I started collecting them. But other than that, we read aloud almost everything that we read for content in those early years.
Okay, so you were reading the one thing out loud across the age range that you had.
Right. Usually we're reading to the oldest kids, and the youngest ones are just coming along. That's just the way it is in a large family.
Yes, I'm there with you for sure. Sometimes actually it's the opposite problem. I'll be like, oh, I never read that book to the fifth child. I've read it however many times aloud to everybody else. I feel like, oh yeah, you've read that. And then it's like, I don't remember that story. So
yeah, I had to go back, and what I would do was I'd take the middle ones right before nap time and read them. I remember reading the I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, Five Little Peppers or something like that.
yes.
That I thought, oh, I read that to the older kids, but I didn't read it to the younger ones. So I would do that. Also, I will say this: my youngest probably doesn't remember our earlier readings of Narnia, although we read it over and over. So he and I, after we finished, as he's getting towards the end of high school, we had just read aloud Dante's Divine Comedy. We'd read Paradise Lost. And I said, in the last six months of his school, I said, Connor, will you just humor me and let me read Narnia aloud to us again? And we did, and it was the most it was one of my favorite homeschooling memories, was doing that with my 18-year-old.
Oh, that is beautiful.
It was so good. So good.
I'd be like, okay, I got to take a moment and not cry. Yes. And that's a good thing to remember too, with a big family, like not to feel sorry for that last kid, because there'll be those times, especially with Lewis, very appropriate, because he talks about a good book is good no matter the age. So it's never too late to read those stories. Yeah. All right. So as the kids got older and you were, hitting some of those older grades, did things change? Did you still just sort of focus on the reading aloud, or how did things change in your homeschool?
Well, things were always changing, of course, as you know, because every time you hit a new season with one kid, you end up with some new thing you have to figure out, which is why homeschooling is never boring. But I would say the main thing that changed was my understanding of what education really should look like and should be. I thought I got a great foundation from the early works that I read, Susan Schaefer Macaulay, even Susan Weisbauer, some of those. I got some great ideas from all of them. But as my kids got older, and it was when I was looking for composition and grammar, language arts, and just not finding anything I wanted. Then I started really pursuing, what should this look like and what does this mean? And at the same time, I started realizing that I could not on my own give my kids what I wanted them to have in terms of science and math, because even though those things were never hard for me as a student, I didn't have the ability to inspire wonder. So that's something that changed over my years too. I started outsourcing those disciplines that I knew someone else could do a better job of inspiring love and wonder. That was a hard lesson for me to learn. It was hard to give up that control, but it was really, really important for my kids.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so you said you started kind of thinking of moving from those early books you read and understanding what education ought to look like or could look like. What was it that sort of would summarize what you thought education, what you kind of came to believe education could look like?
Well, I started understanding it when I started reading more of the actual classics on my own too, instead of just reading about them, which is probably what I was doing more in those early years. I did not have the benefit of a classical education myself. And so I got it along with my kids, especially along with my older kids. They were in a great books course, which you are very familiar with because that's where I met your brother. And so I was reading along with them, and as I was reading things from Plato and Aristotle and Augustine, I was learning what education really should be, and began to understand that even though I think I had kind of a primitive grasp of that idea that it's forming their loves, but it really, I got language to express that.
Yes.
That the idea of forming affections, um, forming them to be people who love God, love their neighbor, and really one of my favorite definitions of classical Christian education that I've ever heard is from Chris Perrin, and he was a throwaway comment. I don't think it was, I think he really meant this, but it's not his normal definition. He said, classical education is fitting our kids for heaven. And that just really struck a chord with me, because it is fitting them for their place in the kingdom in heaven, but also by doing that, it fits them for their place now in this kingdom, in this part of the kingdom. And so I saw that as kind of a double-edged thing there. And that was really formative for me, understanding that all of knowledge should be and is subject to the creator of that knowledge.
Yeah.
And that it's to form us and fit us for the glories that are to come, but also to fit us to do his work here in this world.
And that just changes everything if you have that kind of perspective. Kathy, you've had experience with Charlotte Mason and classical education, which you kind of alluded to earlier. You don't see those as being too distinct or either or kinds of things, but you've had the experience both as a mom, a homeschool mom, and now working at a Christian classical school. So what would your advice be to the mama who's maybe just starting on her homeschool journey and is kind of hearing these terms or is curious about those approaches to education, or the mom who maybe has been homeschooling a while and is kind of curious about maybe changing her educational philosophy? Like, what would you say to a mom who's just starting out?
The first thing I would say is you are doing a great thing for yourself. You think this is for your kids. This is really for you. It's for your kids too. But you are going to learn and grow along with your kids. And that is an amazing thing in itself, but it also is the most inspirational thing you can do for your kids. They are going to see you working to learn. And that has more impact on them than you can possibly believe, in terms of their desire then to do that for themselves. So I would just encourage moms to think about that and to realize it is not selfish for you to take classes or spend time learning Latin or whatever it is that you decide you want to do, whatever thing you love. If you love science, go dig deep into the history of science. It's amazing. I'm taking a course on that right now, and I cannot believe how much I love it. whatever it is that's your passion, do that with all your might and don't see it as selfish. Recognize that you are teaching your kids. One of my favorite things that Dr. Grant says, which is education is repentance. It's always repenting of what I don't know, what I haven't learned, and model that for your children. So that would be my biggest advice, is pursue your own education and bring them along with you.
Amen. Preach it. I often say that, like, when people are like, oh, what should I memorize first or whatever, I'm like, what is enthusiastic? Like, what is mom's enthusiasm? Is there a poem you love? Because if you sort of are like, well, I guess this is what we're supposed to read in morning time. Come on, kids, let's read this. I mean, nobody is going to be excited or get that wonder and enthusiasm, all the beauties that education can be. But if you start with something, even if you think, well, maybe this isn't the like perfect thing or the thing that's on the list, but I'm really excited about it, that really communicates just that love of learning to our children.
Yeah. And, you know, I always tell people this, don't worry so much about, like you just said, about what the content is. Just be faithful, be regular. Even if it's 5-10 minutes a day, be faithful, keep going, keep going. Those little drops of water and little grains of sand really do add up over years to an amazing. I mean, I sit around the dinner table sometime and listen to my kids talk, and I think, who, how'd they get here? And it's just because they came along, you know, they came along for the ride, and at some point they made it their own.
Oh, that is beautiful, and so encouraging for those of us who are still kind of earlier along. We can see that possibility by God's grace in the future, and that's something to look forward to. Well, one of the things that I have long admired about you as I got to know you, I think you mentioned through my brother, first of all, and then I've kind of followed you online a little bit, is your own passion for that lifelong learning. While you were homeschooling, now while you've graduated your kids, you're still learning. So how can we as moms, we know we should do this. We should continue to pursue our own learning. But how do we make that happen in the midst of busy life? Or if a mom is like, I have no background in any of this, this all feels new and overwhelming, how do they even know where to start? Where would you tell somebody to start?
Well, again, I would say whatever you feel like your greatest need is that you want to learn about. If you, let's say, for example, I did not know phonics. So I had to learn phonics along with my kids. That was delightful. It was really fun. And I let them know that I was learning along with them. I often tell people, and even at the Christian school, the idea is sometimes our teachers are the lead learner in the classroom. They're not necessarily the one who's got it all figured out. So part of the process of homeschooling our kids is getting our, you know, you're getting an education from some of that as well. But again, I would say two things. One is what you love, and the other is what you lack. So if you know there are areas in your own education that need attention, homeschooling is the perfect opportunity to do that. Sit in on classes with your kids. Your older kids, give them the benefit of a tutor, and you sit in on that class and learn with them, because then you'll be able to give to your younger kids or to somebody else's kids, which is what's happening now in my life. I learned Latin when I was 40. I started learning Latin when I was 40. And I was very inspired a few years later when I read Plutarch said that he learned Latin in the decline of his life so that he could write his lives. And I thought, oh, okay. And he was actually, I think, closer to 50. So
Wow, you're in good company with Plutarch.
that's what I decided. I'm in very good company. So.
That is fantastic. Yeah, and sometimes we think like, well, I don't already know it, and it's too late to start. Just start wherever you are. It's never too late.
Start where you are. And you have to make it a priority. Of course, it's not going to happen if you don't. And of course, it's going to mean you don't do other things. You have to make those choices. And sometimes circumstances dictate that you can't, but you can always read. You can always find time to read. And, you know, get your husband on board if possible, or your mom or grandma who loves to spend time with kids, and make that day, that morning, that hour, whatever it is that you have, a priority. Turn off all your electronics and just focus on the task at hand of the thing that you've decided. And it's not selfish. It is not selfish for you to say, I need this, I need to be learning in order to be sharing what I'm learning with my kids. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the curriculum that you've designed at Cottage Press Publishing and where your vision is long term for all that?
Yes. Well, right now I'm focusing on the language arts part. I have a lot of ideas for a lot of other things, and I've got the beginnings of a humanities slash arts and letters curriculum, which I share with people for free at this point. But right now I'm trying to really finish up the language arts, because that is, well, it's my area of, where I've really delved in and studied the most. So it's sort of my area. I won't say expertise, because I'm not sure you really ever get to that, but you know what I mean. It's the area I feel like I know the most about. And so I'm really focused on getting that under control, getting it completed, getting it out there. It is basically post phonics. So starting about second grade through, I would say, 10th or 11th grade curriculum. And it's complete language arts, apart from in the very beginning years, you might still need some spelling depending on your student. I'm a big believer in systematic phonics and spelling. And some students, it varies from student to student how long they need to do that. But when they still need work on it. And it's very much based in classical principles. It's imitation, a lot of imitation, a lot of just beautiful literary selections that they can imitate. A lot of Charlotte Mason principles in the beginning. So the younger years, not only does it include some spelling lessons and some copy work and things like that, there's also nature study and art study built in. And I've had people ask me, why do you put that in the language arts curriculum? Well, because being able to observe and tell is foundational to being able to write. And so all those things are included as just part of a wide, generous feast for those younger years. And then they move through the levels of the Progymnasmata, which is it's basically the exercises that were used in ancient Greece in the training of students really in the art of speaking, the art of rhetoric. And so for them, it was the art of the orator. But for us, it does tend to be more the arts of writing, but the principles transfer very, very well. So there's 14 levels, and it's progressive through the books, although some of the earlier books, there will be review. So if families are coming to it a little bit later, they don't have to go all the way back to the beginning. They can start, at one of the higher levels. So basically, it takes them through basically every kind of writing they're going to need for their whole life, academic and outside of academic, because academic writing is for most of us, is very short and done, and communication and writing for the rest of our life is something else. And so that's what we're aiming, is not just to train them for academics, although it's a great academic preparation, but also to train them for any writing that they're going to need to do, or speaking in life. Obviously, the actual practice of speaking needs to be done by a teacher in the situation, but this gives you everything you need up to that point.
Yeah, well, it sort of goes back to what you said earlier. You're raising not people who can, necessarily be academics, although, that's often a part of their life and that's important, but you're raising good humans, right? And so those skills of communication are just important. My husband is an engineer and he has to write all the time, write to clients, write proposals. So even in something that if somebody's like, oh, well, my kid's a math and science person, they don't need to know how to write. We all need to know how to communicate clearly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also, the idea too is also, for that academic part, is introducing them to the stuff that they really need to have a grasp of for academics as well. So yes, that's true. In the high school books, well, they're junior high to high school, we use literature as the main source of ideas for our writing. So Poetics and Progym 1, they read the Odyssey. Poetics and Progym 2, they read the Aeneid and Macbeth and some Plutarch. And in Poetics and Progym 3, they read the entire Divine Comedy. So they've gotten a deep, deep dive into those books. They read them over the whole year. And then that way, it also frees up your humanities curriculum a little bit, because you aren't going to be able to do that kind of a deep dive with every single book.
Right.
So there's that aspect of it as well.
That is great, because then you can read broadly and not feel like you have to, write deep essays about every single thing you're reading, but you can do what you're doing really well.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Right. That's the idea.
Yeah. One of the things I love to ask veteran homeschool moms, and I do this both in my work online and just in regular life, I like to ask them if they could go back in time and talk to their new homeschool mom self. Knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself as a new homeschool mom?
Oh my goodness. Relax. They'll be fine. Yeah, don't worry about that. They're going to be okay, and send them outside a lot. Yeah, I think there were too many times, especially with my older kids, that I really stressed myself out and then stressed them out about what I thought somebody else's expectations of what they were supposed to be learning was. I wasted time and energy on that. And that would probably be my biggest don't do. And my biggest do would be read, 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 and read some more. Read aloud, read aloud. Make it your family culture. It's the second best thing we ever did for our kids. The first best thing we've ever done for our kids is to be in church every Sunday and be part of a Bible-believing church, being in the life of the church. But the reading aloud, I would say, is second.
Thank you. That is very encouraging, and I think something that all of us need to hear and be reminded of over and over as we pursue this adventure of homeschooling. Well, Kathy, where can people find you around the web?
Well, my website for Cottage Press is cottagepresspublishing.net. I also blog pretty infrequently, I have to admit, at thereadingmother.net. Although I do have an assistant who is working on transcribing some of the papers that I wrote for my graduate degree into shorter blogs, because there are a lot of them. There's a lot of Narnia in there and other things. So she has been so wonderful in helping me with that. So that there will hopefully be a little bit more coming out on that front. And then our classical school here, if you live in Loudoun County, is loudonclassicalschool.com.
Fabulous. Well, I will have all of the links to the sites and everything in the show notes. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you, Amy.